I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Ryan Routh case. These are my speculations. It's not a diagnosis at all.
The Clinical File with John Cordray.
What drives a person to believe they alone can alter the course of global events through extreme actions? In Ryan Routh's story, one of the most striking red flags emerges from his time in Ukraine, where he exhibited clear signs of delusions of grandeur by attempting to recruit fighters for a war he had no formal role in, despite being rejected by official channels for failing psychological evaluations. This behavior suggests a profound disconnect from reality, where personal significance overrides practical boundaries. Viewers often wonder how such inflated self-perception develops, and in this case, it ties directly to a pattern of escalating ideological fixation that could signal underlying narcissistic traits. Routh's actions in Ukraine weren't just enthusiastic support. They appeared to stem from a belief that he was uniquely positioned to influence an international conflict. If you ever question how everyday frustrations can spiral into dangerous obsession, this analysis will break down the psychological threads that may have pulled him toward his eventual confrontation with authorities. In this episode of The Clinical File, I'll examine the mental health indicators of this case. The most recent development in the Ryan Routh case came on February 4, 2026, when the U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon sentenced him to life in prison, plus an additional 7 years for his conviction in the attempted assassination of then presidential candidate and now President Donald Trump. The sentencing followed a trial where Routh represented himself, leading to a guilty verdict on September 23, 2025, on 5 federal counts, including attempted assassination, assault on a federal officer, and firearms offenses. Prosecutors emphasized Routh's lack of remorse during the proceedings, noting in court filings that he viewed his actions as justified by political and global events. His defense attorney argued for a lighter sentence of 20 years plus the mandatory 7, citing a psychiatric evaluation that pointed to possible narcissistic personality disorder and bipolar II disorder. The judge, however, sided with the prosecution, highlighting the premeditated nature of the plot and Routh's history of criminal behavior. Just after the guilty verdict in 2025, Routh attempted to harm himself in court by trying to stab his neck with a pen, but marshals intervened quickly. This incident raises questions about acute stress responses under pressure, often seen in individuals grappling with the collapse of their self-narrative. How might such a moment reflect deeper emotional instability? We see similar patterns in cases where perceived failures trigger impulsive self-directed aggression, potentially linked to untreated mood disorders. Turning to the timeline of events, the incident itself unfolded on September 15, 2024 at the Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach, Florida. You probably have seen it. A Secret Service agent spotted the barrel of a rifle protruding from the bushes along the golf course perimeter while conducting a security sweep. The agent fired shots toward the area, prompting Routh to flee the scene without returning fire. Authorities later apprehended him on Interstate 95 after a witness provided a vehicle description and license plate. Investigators discovered an SKS-style rifle with a scope, and the serial number was scratched out, along with ceramic plates for body armor and a GoPro camera at the site. Routh had positioned himself in the bushes for nearly 12 hours, according to cell phone data, indicating meticulous planning. This level of preparation often points to obsessive rumination, a psychological indicator where an individual fixates on the goal to the exclusion of risk or consequences. Why would someone invest such time in an act that seems destined for failure? It could stem from a cognitive distortion where the perceived righteousness of a cause overshadows assessment. In the months leading up to the event, Routh's activities revealed a deeper ideological commitment. He had traveled to Ukraine 6 times between 2022 and 2023, attempting to join the International Legion for the Defense of Ukraine. Officials rejected him after he failed a psychological screening, with one source close to the Ukrainian leadership describing him as unstable due to mental health concerns. Despite this, Routh persisted in recruiting others, posting on social media about forming units of foreign fighters, including Afghans. Volunteers who encountered him described Routh as combative and argumentative, refusing to adhere to basic protocols. One American volunteer noted his delusions of grandeur and disconnection from reality, suggesting he saw himself as a pivotal figure in the conflict. Such descriptions align with narcissistic personality traits where individuals overestimate their influence and struggle with interpersonal boundaries. Have you considered how rejection in one area might fuel escalation in another? In mental health terms, this could represent compensatory behavior, where unmet needs for validation drive riskier pursuits. Routh's self-published book on February 2023, titled Ukraine's Unwinnable War, provides further insight into his mindset. In it, he expressed regret for voting for Trump in 2016, calling it a terrible mistake. He positioned himself as partly responsible for Trump's rise and implied his own life might end dramatically in support of Ukraine. This writing style reveals a blend of self-importance and fatalism common in individuals with bipolar tendencies during manic phases. The book's content also included militant calls, suggesting that the Kremlin should be burned down. Psychologically, this escalation from verbal expression to action planning might indicate a progression from ideation to intent, a red flag in threat assessment. Authorities found a handwritten letter Routh left in a box months before the incident addressed Dear World, where he admitted attempting to assassinate Trump but failing and offered $150,000 to anyone who could finish the job. He described giving it all the gumption he could muster. The letter underscores a Masonic complex where the individual believes their mission transcends personal survival. In counseling, we often see these in clients with grandiose delusions, where they assign themselves heroic or sacrificial roles in larger narratives. Routh's motives appear rooted in political disillusionment and frustration with U.S. policy on Ukraine. Social media posts show he initially supported Trump, but shifted to criticism after events like the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot, which he called a catastrophe perpetrated by Trump. By 2020, he posted directly to Trump, expressing disappointment in his leadership. This pivot suggests cognitive dissonance, where initial admiration turns to betrayal, potentially exacerbating feelings of alienation. Isolation seems to have played a role in Routh's trajectory. After moving to Hawaii around 2019, he ran a small business building tiny homes, but reports indicate strained relationships. Neighbors in North Carolina, where he lived for decades, described his family as weird, noting odd behaviors like keeping a horse in the house and an unsettling collection of guns. While no specific childhood trauma is documented, growing up in an environment perceived as unconventional might contribute to long-term social disconnection. In mental health analysis, early family dynamics can foster attachment issues, leading to difficulties in forming stable bonds later in life. Routh's criminal history, spanning from the 1980s to 2010 in North Carolina, includes charges like possession of stolen goods, hit and run, and a 2002 standoff where he barricaded himself with an automatic weapon. These incidents point to a pattern of impulsive and defiant behavior, often associated with personality disorders. The 2002 event in particular involved erratic driving and threats, suggesting possible unmanaged anger or paranoia. How does a history of minor offenses evolve into something more severe? It might reflect untreated underlying conditions where small escalations build without intervention. During his trial, Routh's decision to represent himself raised additional concerns. He delivered opening statements filled with philosophical tangents on human evolution, kindness, and intent, rather than focusing on evidence. This approach could indicate impaired judgment, a symptom of bipolar disorder where grandiosity impairs practical decision-making. Witnesses described him as frantic after fleeing the golf course, behaviors consistent with acute stress reactions. Public defenders earlier in the case noted Routh had consulted mental health professionals in jail who deemed him delusional. The sentencing psychiatric report confirmed suggestions of narcissistic personality disorder characterized by a need for admiration and a lack of empathy, and bipolar II, involving hypomanic episodes and depression. These conditions might explain the oscillation between fervent activism and reckless actions. In my experience as a counselor, individuals with such profiles often struggle with impulse control, viewing their choices as justified by a higher purpose. Routh's family attended parts of the trial, including his children, but details in their relationship remain limited. Reports suggest estrangement, which could amplify feelings of abandonment. Psychologically, perceived betrayal in personal or political spheres can trigger vengeful ideation, especially if compounded by mood instability. The GoPro camera found at the scene implies a desire for posthumous recognition, a trait seen in those with narcissistic wounds seeking legacy through infamy. This setup creates a curiosity about intent. Was it documented for self-glorification or evidence for others? It ties back to the letter's bounty offer, suggesting a belief in inspiring followers. As the case progressed, Routh showed no regret in court statements, instead framing his actions around Ukraine and U.S. politics. Prosecutors highlighted this as evidence of dangerous ideology. From a mental health perspective, lack of remorse might stem from rationalization, a defense mechanism where harmful acts are reframed as necessary. This is common in extremist mindsets, where black and white thinking dominates. The sentencing brought closure to a legal chapter, but it leaves open questions about prevention. How can society identify and intervene in cases of escalating delusions? Routh's story illustrates the intersection of personal psychology and global events, where unmet needs for significance drive extreme paths. His rejection in Ukraine, combined with political shifts, may have created a perfect storm of resentment. In analyzing victim impact, though no one was physically harmed, the psychological ripple effects on those involved, including security personnel and the target, Trump, can include heightened vigilance and trust issues. For the broader public, such events erode a sense of safety, potentially leading to collective anxiety. Routh's case reminds us that mental health indicators like grandiosity and isolation don't exist in a vacuum. They interact with life stressors. Early recognition through community or professional support might alter trajectories. Yet in this incident, multiple red flags, failed screenings, erratic history, militant writings went unaddressed until it became a crisis. This prompts a reflection here. What systems could better connect at-risk individuals to help? In this case, the aha moment comes in seeing how fragmented behaviors coalesce to a singular premeditated act. The Ukraine obsession, political flip, and self-hero narrative form a coherent, if disoriented, psychological mosaic. It underscores the motives often rooted in perceived injustices amplified by internal vulnerabilities. The digital footprint Routh left, the post, the book, the letter, serves as a trail of mental breadcrumbs, showing progression from discontent to determination. This evolution highlights the importance of monitoring online expressions as potential indicators. In counseling terms, intervention like cognitive behavioral therapy could challenge such distortions, but access remains a barrier for many. Routh's age, nearing 60 at sentencing, adds another layer. Late life crisis can exacerbate latent issues. His attorney's appeal plans suggest ongoing legal battles, but the psychological story ends with a man whose overconfidence in his worldview led to irreversible consequences. Confidence and competence don't always travel together, as seen here. You know, what really strikes me here as a therapist is that Routh had obvious mental health issues, not once, not a singular time, but for over multiple years. He's been through evaluations, he's been in the justice system, was released. Somewhere along the line, he was deemed not harmful. But as we can tell, he's been harmful. He literally wanted to kill the then presidential, now President Trump. And this is a wake-up call, I believe, for the emergence of mental health professionals in the legal system. We've got to connect. We've got to rely on the professionals with mental health skills to identify potentially people who are going to be a danger to themselves or others. And we want to prevent this from happening. And so when Ruth was arrested the first time, there should have been something there to help him and to not let him be in the public without treatment. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements about Ruth that stood out to you? Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.